Hi, my name is Milan McLaughlin, and the title of my project is Deepfake Porn, the Digital Assault of Women's Bodies. A deepfake is the process of superimposing one video or image over another. It is a portmanteau of the words deep learning and fake and refers to the computer programs that combine human image synthesis with artificial intelligence. Deepfakes are used to create manipulated digital representations that are intended to seem real. The conception of deepfake pornography began in autumn 2017 on Reddit. An anonymous Reddit user under the pseudonym Deepfakes was the first to create and release several realistic pornographic videos. It is here where the term deepfake was coined. Following the release of these face-swapping pornographic videos, another anonymous Reddit user under the pseudonym DeepFakeApp released FakeApp, a free application which allows the creation of deepfakes to not only become more accessible, but also more straightforward. Before its fruition, the construction of authentic doctored videos was not only costly, but also an extremely technical process that was ultimately confined to Hollywood studios. This application essentially streamlined this then arduous process by allowing it to become readily available to people without any programming experience. My interest in deepfakes came about when I watched a TED Talk on Noelle Martin and her experience of being a victim of deepfake pornography. She reverse Google image searched an old photo of herself to only find several stolen images from her social media linked to various porn sites. Even after making her account private, these predators found meticulous ways to gain access to her photos. They created fake profiles, befriended her friends and family, followed the public galleries of the events and places that she frequented, and even shared her location and full name publicly to intimidate her. I find this important for a number of reasons, but one, now anyone with a sufficiently powerful laptop can right now fabricate videos essentially indistinguishable from the original. And something that's especially noteworthy is that 96% of deepfake videos are pornographic and women are the target. And anyone with a social media presence can unknowingly be a victim. And yes, media falsification is hardly new, but the game-changing factor here is the scope, scale, and sophistication. So my thesis is I argue that the formation of deepfake technology enforces gender disparities within visual culture. Disparities meant for the reification of women's bodies as a thing to be visually consumed, ultimately circumventing consent. The gendered bias within deepfakes can be better understood by looking at the intertwined history of pornography and technology. Every type of new information since the printing press has generated pornography. Pamela, which was often considered the first English novel, was followed 8 years later by a pornographic adaptation called Fanny Hill. Pornography was the deciding factor that established VHS as the primary form of playback recording, and porn videos hit blockbuster-like stores a year before regular Hollywood releases. Overall, the point of these examples is to highlight the influence of male-dominated content and technology creation that caters towards the desire of male audience and users. This idea can be further supplemented by John Burgers in Ways of Seeing, and he asserts that visual consumption historically exists to reify masculine roles of looking. In both life and art, social conventions dictate that men and women are perceived differently. Men have the capacity to project power that reaches outside of their bodies, while women's capacity for power is strictly intrinsic. A woman's entire being is thought to reside in her physical appearance. In the context of deepfakes, women have no ability to assert their presence. This gendered bias can be dated back to European oil paintings that often featured Adam and Eve. A woman's nakedness was facilitated by her relationship to the viewer. She either performs shame in modesty or exhibits herself proudly, but she never exists as simply naked and unaware she's being looked at. Thus, Berger's model of the surveyor/surveyed perfectly encapsulates the deeper context of deepfake pornography, where deepfake users and creators see women as interchangeable body parts. And author Lynn Hunt explains this prevalence of sexual visual information in her book. Pornography attaches itself to a new technological medium, partly because it's a genre that's very interested in technological means. One of the famous things that goes on in early pornography is to say, love is not about emotion, love is about sexual desire. It reduces sex to a set of technologies that arouse desire, satisfy desire, and create new desires. Pornography is about cataloging all the variations, treating human bodies as interchangeable parts in a machine. This helps illuminate why the use of deepfakes to produce pornography proves so rampant. If creators presume women as subjects as a thing to be used, it is evident that the issue of consent in the creation of deepfakes will remain unacknowledged. The legal challenges of deepfakes. There are laws set against revenge porn as it's a violation of privacy, but these laws do not seamlessly translate over victims of deepfake pornography. Unlike a personal nude, photo, or video taken without consent, deepfakes differ as they're technically considered fictitious. It is not clear whether deepfake porn violates any law, as the content is not defamatory and cannot be classified as revenge porn. The legal challenges of deepfakes is further convoluted by the difficulty in defining the victim and identifying the perpetrator. Deepfakes involve the depiction of two people, the person whose body is truthfully being represented and the person whose face that has been falsely added. This begs the question of who should be considered the victim. How can liability be imposed for revealing the intimate details of a person's life when no real person has been exposed? Due to the anonymity offered by many internet platforms, it can be challenging to locate or identify the perpetrator. Deepfake creators can utilize software such as Tor that make the IP address attached to the deepfake untraceable. Social medias. While various social media platforms have publicly renounced pornographic deepfakes off their sites, there are still a number of issues. First, these sites rely on users to spot and report them. And second, it seems unlikely that those who engage with this content would want to remove it. Finally, and most notably, under the Communication Decency Act of 1996, these websites have no legal liability for content posted by third-party users, even when it comes to non-consensual pornography. This gives no motivation for these platforms to seek out and remove deepfake pornography themselves. For example, in the Barnes versus Yahoo court case, Yahoo faced no consequences for leaving up a revenge porn video of Cecilia Barnes posted by her ex-boyfriend, even though they had promised her that they would remove it. And this is thanks to the Communication Decency Act of 1996. Thus, a public statement renouncing deepfakes is more talk than action, and sadly, these videos are still uploaded to these platforms. And while there's no federal law that criminalizes the creation and distribution of deepfakes, in October 2019, California officially passed Assembly Bill number 602. This bill provides a private right of action against a person who created or disclosed another's sexually explicit content through the use of deepfake technology. However, despite its noble cause, similar to this escalator that is followed by a set of stairs in my background, this bill has some notable shortcomings. First, the bill aims to protect only the persons whose face is superimposed, but not the person whose body is depicted within the video. And second, legal recourse is contingent on identifying the creator/distributor of the deepfake. So if social media platforms are exempt from liability and the anonymous perpetrators remain undetected, then who should be held responsible? If the court case is contingent on identifying the creator or distributor of the deepfake, what can victims do when most of the perpetrators are faceless and nameless? Ultimately, the diffusion of accountability facilitates a virtual playground for the digital assault of women free of penalties. To conclude, the law must redirect its focus on preventative measures that will deter creators from producing deepfakes. And we will constantly be in an arms race between digital manipulations and the ability to detect them because the advancement of AI-based algorithms are catalyzing on both sides. And with time, deciphering between the real and the fake will be indiscernible. And so while you may not have experienced the same horrific story as Noelle Martin, it only takes one perpetrator and a few minutes of their time to change that. Thank you, and that is the end of my presentation. And now I'd like to pass off the mic to Jonah Morris. Take it away, Jonah.
All right. Thank you, Milan, for that beautiful introduction. My name is Jonah Morris, and I'm going to be presenting my senior comprehensive project titled James Dean, Beyonce, Lady Gaga, Mediating Rebellion in the Entertainment Industry. Now, rebellion is defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as opposition to an authority or dominance. The word can also mean stubborn or obstinate. Etymologically, it originates from the Latin word rebellus, which combines the root re to revolt with bellare to make war. A rebel is typically one who makes war on their own country for political reasons. In the fraught political era, rebellion takes many unexpected forms. My argument, however, is that for celebrities, this has always been the case through varying forms of pop culture media. Over the past half century, a plethora of iconic performers from varying backgrounds have served as innovative and resourceful rebels. That is, they have waged subtle and culturally transformative war, not always against the government, but against governing and oppressive social norms. In each case, such performers have used their public persona and specific skillful use of media to address issues closely linked with their public identities. Now, in my project, I set out to consider the particular forms through which rebellion has been expressed and deployed, specifically in the work of James Dean, Beyonce, and Lady Gaga, which are figures that I chose because I felt like they represented different areas of intersectionality. Each of these iconic performers lived or lives in a social ferment in which they are both subject to pressures and act as catalysts for change. In my project, I argued that neither charismatic performers nor their adept use of media are alone sufficient to influence social attitudes. Instead, Dean, Beyonce, and Lady Gaga mask their unconventional attitudes through compelling public personas and innovative media usage at a moment in history when social mores and attitudes were or are already susceptible to change. In other words, gifted and media savvy performers sometimes emerge serendipitously, and what appears to be rebellion may actually galvanize social change that is already taking place. For James Dean, his explicit use of psychologically keyed acting method was a significant subversion of masculine mores. It made clear that men did not have to be strong, silent types, but could be deeply emotional and expressive. This was particularly true within his second film, Rebel Without a Cause, that many younger audiences resonated with, especially those that were questioning their own sexuality um, and may have felt estranged from their own families in a post World War II family environment. That film, directed alongside Nicholas Ray, um, had Dean model a new way of being a man. Even his public presence as a guy in a leather jacket and a t-shirt, which was a profound defiance of cultured male attire at the time, was significant. Further, Dean defied the constraints of the studio system by working with what would now be called indie directors. In particular, as I mentioned, Nicholas Ray. Now, Nicholas Ray and Dean were arguably complicit in promoting queerness through subtle yet apparently intentional cues and subtext within Rebel Without a Cause. Ultimately, Dean's tragic early death leaves the viewer wondering what further cultural disruptions he might have affected if he had lived longer, but also his enduring legacy um, remains relevant today. Beyonce, a performer of a very different era, has confidently and skillfully disrupted the stereotype of the black woman. She's unabashedly powerful, a true influencer. It would be easy for Beyonce to fall into hypersexualized stereotypes of a black woman, or conversely, she might have chosen to step cautiously away from a self presentation as a sexualized woman. Instead, Beyonce has successfully claimed it all. She expresses her sexuality on her own terms, not as an objectified female, but as a woman in a powerful romantic and cultural relationship with star Jay Z, or Jay Carter, as a gorgeous woman who is also happily mothered. Beyonce has cannily used music, video, and even halftime shows, referring to Super Bowl halftime shows in which she's performed it too. Um, and they're surely the bastion of conservative American male values. Her most recent one, 2016, took on police brutality and Black Lives Matter content. Beyonce is also a cultural innovator in re-envisioning the power and import of award shows. Now I'm gonna butcher this name, but by introducing Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's words into her performance at an MTV award show, Beyonce is making several surprising claims. Firstly, she's demonstrating that award shows are not just about passively accepting accolades, they're about establishing a richer identity for the performer and placing that performer in a larger social context. In this case, she is suggesting a global community by citing a Nigerian writer and insisting that women get to define their own mode of sexuality and feminism. Finally, despite the fact that she is an extremely wealthy woman, she exhibits an understanding of inequality in America by showcasing her use of media in direct relation to commerce. By making her work available on Netflix in the form of the Homecoming concert documentary, which was the focus of my analysis of her, and I used that documentary on Netflix as my media object. She's ensuring access to an audience that might find attendance at their traditional concert venue too expensive. Coachella is historically upper class and white dominated music festival. Altogether, Beyonce has broken boundaries of race, gender, and class with striking skill and confidence. Though obviously their work together in video makes clear that Beyonce and Lady Gaga share similarities, Lady Gaga is a unique presence and one who has made use of media in very distinctive ways. At times, it feels as though entertainment may even be secondary to Gaga's use of media for her own social justice ends. I took a look at Gaga's work in her 10-minute epic music video for Telephone, which features Beyonce. And it's pretty evident that through the video that Gaga is invested in the idea of spectacle, even to the point of appearing bizarre or unidentifiable. Whether it be through music videos like that or wearing raw meat costume dresses to accept awards, painting eyelashes on her cheeks, or presenting herself as ambiguously gendered, Gaga's persona is deliberately unstable and disruptive of any given social norm. Indeed, she has been referred to as a shapeshifter. If Beyonce has used media to defy stereotypes about gender and race, Lady Gaga is more radically subversive. Her self presentation suggests a more thorough refusal of stable identity and perhaps even an invitation to let identity be free flowing. Certainly, Gaga has used her influence to strongly support marginalized populations, LGBTQ communities, and survivors of sexual assault, for example. In essence, she has taken the efforts of performers like James Dean and Beyonce to new heights. In this new media world, the message is the medium and is an opportunity to reconsider and remake an identity, any identity imaginable to reality. In conclusion, Each of these performers, James Dean, Beyonce, and Lady Gaga, gained cultural prominence that was astounding and truly transformative of the cultural context and norms through which they emerged. Each used media adeptly in order to make or imply statements that disrupted and defied the cultural constraints that would otherwise have defined them. All three of these iconic media presences seemed aware that their use of media could be used innovatively in order to not only enlarge their private freedoms and public acclaim, but also to make a positive difference in terms of social and cultural freedoms for others. Thank you. That concludes my presentation. I would now like to introduce Pi and her project, Beyond Whiteness, Asian Beauty in a Globalized World.
Growing up as a Thai American, I was able to visit my relatives in Thailand almost every summer. I was always told to cover up so that my skin wouldn't darken from the sunlight, even if it was super humid out. I didn't really think much of it until I got older and realized that there is this cultural bias against darker skin, and it definitely goes beyond not wanting to get sunburnt. This has sparked my curiosity over Thai and Asian beauty standards. On my most recent trip to Thailand, I became aware of the countless skin whitening products on store shelves everywhere I went. According to global industry analysts, the global skin whitening market was valued at $4.8 billion in 2017 and is anticipated to reach $8.9 billion by 2027. Asian countries make up the majority of sales. These whitening products have led to a Eurocentric misconception that Asians want to look Caucasian. Being fair-skinned indicates that one is of a higher socioeconomic status, as those with darker skin are correlated to come from a background of hard field labor out in the sun. As a result, white skin in Asia is an important asset for obtaining several financial opportunities. The need for ivory skin dates back to at least the mid-19th century, where upper-class Japanese men and women displayed their elite status with white lead powder makeup. This example of colorism has been a long-standing socioeconomic marker in East Asia before European imperialism in 1853. Beyond skin color, I've noticed the continued influence of East Asian beauty practices on Thailand. More cosmetic procedures are performed in South Korea than anywhere else in the world, but the third largest percentage of patients are from Southeast Asia. The surgery most sought out is double eyelid surgery. This is where the skin around the eye is reshaped to create a fold. Because many Asians are born with monolids, this surgery is supposed to make the eyes look bigger and brighter. I argue that with the continued development of Eastern and Western cultures clashing after European colonialism, interethnic group racism is driving the rise of racial ideologies in contemporary Asian beauty standards. I examined Thailand as a Southeast Asian case study under the cultural influence of East Asian country South Korea. Ads in the Thai media popularize and reinforce these standards. 2016 Soul Secret advertisement for pills that supposedly whitens one's skin is an example of such an ad.
คุณรู้อะไรมากว่าคริสจะมาถึงตรงนี้ได้ การแข่งขันมันสูงมาก จะอยู่ได้นานๆไม่ใช่เรื่องง่าย แล้วถ้าคริสหยุดดูแลตัวเองเมื่อไหร่ ทุกอย่างที่ทุ่มเทมา ความขาวที่ลงทุนไว้ก็หมดไป เด็กใหม่ที่เข้ามาแทนที่ อาจทำให้เรากลายเป็นดาวดับ
แค่ขาวก็ชนะ ใหม่ Snows
As exemplified by Chris's darkening skin color. The commercial highlights the idea that East Asians prevail over Southeast Asians within the Asian racial hierarchy. Sociologist Trina Jones references Eduardo Bonilla Silva's research in her work on the significance of skin color in Asian communities. Bonilla Silva finds the emergence of honorary white Asians of East Asia and collective black Asians of Southeast Asia. This is because after European colonization, East Asian countries were able to capitalize first and remain the wealthiest regions in Asia today. It's important to note that East Asians ethnically have fairer skin than Southeast Asians. As a result, these two groups have severe gaps in income, educational attainment, and professional status. This has fueled interethnic racism between East and Southeast Asians. Thailand has raced to become a modernized country by integrating some of the modern beauty standards of its eastern neighbors who remain fairer skinned than the rest of the Thai population. In a beauty store called Even Boy, I come across 3 lined up shelf ads featuring Caucasian Thai celebrities as the face of their products. These mixed-race celebrities are associated with the cultural values of being gentle, high-class, and transnational. Now more so than ever, there's a desire for white mixed-race celebrities over other racial minorities. These are the celebrities being featured on the majority of Thai skincare ads.
I woke up like this. Snow White icy mask. Glowing skin.
I simplify affect to be the instinctual biological reactions that we have universally in response to media shown to us. These innate, visceral responses always precede cognitive thought. Let Me In is a TV show that evokes the affect of disgust. Let Me In is a South Korean cosmetic surgery TV makeover show. The series is sponsored by ID Hospital Korea, a massive plastic surgery clinic.
해변의 힐링. 모난 얼굴과 모난 인생에 갇혀 살던 그녀는 어떤 기적을 보여줄 것인가?
Due to the high number of foreign applications from Thailand, Thai media company Workpoint Entertainment bought the rights to produce a Thai spin-off of the show. Yet, participants are sent to South Korea, where they undergo procedures to look like the current Korean standard of beauty. The episode titles of Season 1 and 2 labels participants with nicknames. These labels demonize the participants and identify them as the other, those that are perceived as a threat to cultural norms.
Hela ความผิดปกติชัดมากเลยอ่ะ
คำพูดที่ใครๆกล่าวถึงนั้นก็คือคุณปุ๋ยวนิดา อันทะคำภูอายุ 21 ปี
From extreme close-ups to eyes, dramatic music and glass-shattering visual effects, the show's combined excessive editing invokes that the individuals are a visual spectacle.
ฟันแบบง้มออกมาเหมือนไดโนเสาร์เลยครับ
ทางมะม่วงตามมาเลย
นั่งอยู่อีกโต๊ะนึงแล้วมีเพื่อนคนละห้องมาทัก เฮ้ย เบี้ยว เขาก็จะล้อกัน มาใครอะเบี้ยว
Testimonies from peers and family create sympathy but also degrade individuals.
แบบเคยเห็นแม่ไม่ได้นอนติดกัน2 คืน 3 คืน
By also cutting to shots of the live audience's reaction, viewers are trained to empathize with the participant, but at the same time gawk with an affect of disgust. Nigel Thrift, a British sociologist and geographer, explains that aesthetic pleasure is an effective force generating sensory and emotional gratification. In fact, celebrity culture aids in generating this affect of aesthetic pleasure. We can see the affect of glamour in the highly aestheticized music videos popular Korean girl groups utilize to capture attention. Ranging from cute, innocent concepts to fierce girl crush concepts that reinforce gendered aesthetics. These videos exemplify the popularization and influence of Korean pop culture in Southeast Asia. During my last visit to a local cosmetics store in Thailand, I discovered a recently released Let Me In beauty line. I then came across a YouTube channel promoting the beauty line to Thai consumers with former participants of the show, along with Korean and Thai celebrities. This commercial also capitalizes on the development of Korean beauty as a standard of beauty for Thai women to strive for. This particular commercial is supposed to mimic the affect of glamour found in many Korean pop music videos. The sharp dance moves are meant to highlight her body and skin to the viewer's gaze, along with the objectifying close-ups. Although the ad is catered to Thai consumers, ICE sings only in Korean and bits of English. Thai is subtitled. The only Thai spoken is at the end, where a narrator explains the product's benefits and ICE says,
ผิว bright ไอชอบ
Ultimately, media and beauty corporations are ideological state apparatuses that have commodified gendered racial beauty ideals. From releasing countless ads to sponsoring TV shows, they've worked vigorously to determine how Asian women perceive beauty. The affect of aesthetic pleasure is utilized in media to capture consumers' attention and maintain women's desire for social mobility through beauty means. As racial globalization continues to change beauty ideals, it's important to remind ourselves that they aren't what defines Asian beauty or our own.
Hi, I'm Emma, and this is my senior comps presentation on the contours of queer consent, examining representations of sexual consent in queer cinema. So first, I started by asking, how do we receive consent education? I did not receive a formal education on consent in my sex ed class in high school, so the first time I really learned about it was when I came to Occidental at the first year orientation. So then this led me to ask, how is consent represented in media? Because media is where I gained my informal knowledge and education of consent. Not great. There are significant gaps in representations of consent in media, and in this I mean that the consent is ambiguously represented or it's just not represented at all. Finally, I was really interested in focusing on queer consent messaging because in existing consent education on what consent looks like, it's mostly geared towards heterosexual couples, so it doesn't really account for what consent looks like in queer relationships. So how does this apply to film and television? In this study on consent communication in film, the researcher asserts that young adults seek out media content such as television and film to obtain information about sexuality, particularly in the absence of other sources of information. So this really points to that without having an explicit consent script, young people are misled by scenes of ambiguous consent, and therefore they don't have the rhetoric to vocalize the desires and consent that equip us with the tools to then engage in healthy and equitable sexual encounters. So what is consent? This was one of the guiding questions for my project. In a sexual connotation, consent is the foundation of any form of encounter or intimacy. And on the screen, I have the California affirmative definition of consent. So consent is ongoing, it is freely and actively given, it is revocable, it is informed and reciprocal, and it's mutually understandable. Basically, consent is founded in communication. And this communication is both verbal and physical. It's not just a yes or a no, a box to be checked. Instead, it's this ongoing process that continues throughout the entire encounter and even to the end. And I also really wanted to highlight this quote that consent also has to do with boundaries and limits, power, desire, vulnerability, disclosure, risk, access, shame, histories. I think this is especially pertinent in relation to queer narratives and something that I'm going to highlight throughout the presentation. So I looked at this project through the frame of queer theory, and this quote at the top, queer theorists seek the points where our categories break down and stop making sense, was something that really threaded in nicely with my project. Essentially, queer theorists are seeking the in-between, and that's what I'm trying to do in understanding and delving into consent, rather than trying to solve it and fix or label something as good or bad. I'm looking to more untangle and to understand the nuance that lies within consent. So ultimately, I argue that queer films offer us a uniquely integral space to understand and untangle the nuances of consent, whether via subversion or perpetuation of heterosexual representations of consent. And so the media objects that I chose to focus on are predominantly lesbian films, mainstream indie as well, and they each take on a different role in terms of what their consent looks like, both on screen and off screen. So I choose to focus on consent off screen as well because I think it's an equally important part of the process in terms of shooting and creating a consensual sex scene, as well as there being consent on screen in the scene and the shot. There has to be consent off screen between the actors, the actresses, and the director and everyone else involved on set because it is an extremely vulnerable and intimate scene to be shooting. There has to be consent on all fronts. So the first film that I'm focusing on is Blue is the Warmest Color. It was directed by Abdelatif Kechiche and released in 2013. And it was released when I was 15, and it was a very impactful movie for me when I was younger. And I think that it was really interesting to unpack and to really examine how the consent is communicated in this film, because on screen it is ambiguous consent. In the infamous 7-minute sex scene in this film, there's really no moments of in between where the women are discussing their boundaries or really discussing their preferences or just figuring things out. Instead, it's just cut and spliced scenes of them licking and grabbing and kissing and touching. So there's really not the space for the moment to unfold, and it comes across in a very heteronormative male gaze sense. And then I also wanted to problematize, or to trouble more so, off-screen the lack of consent between the director and actresses. The actresses were very vocal about the fact that shooting that 7-minute sex scene actually took about 10 hours, and they really felt stripped of their agency in that the director was pushing them to do things that they didn't feel entirely comfortable. So I think that really goes to show how important it is to be very intentional about shooting sex scenes and to also enlist the services of an intimacy coordinator or director who is someone that coordinates and choreographs sex scenes to ensure that there's consent from all parties involved in the scene. So the next film that I'm going to focus on is Duck Butter, and Duck Butter really varies from Blue is the Warmest Color in that it actually lets the moments of sex and consent unfold on screen. Duck Butter follows two women that meet at a bar and then decide to spend the next 24 hours together, punctuating each hour with sex. So this consensually forced intimacy really allows the viewer to see the in-betweenness of sex and really allows the consent to unfold in a very affirmative and physical and verbal way, in that they consent with open body language and eye contact and reciprocated touch. And this continued off screen. The actress on the right, Alia Shawkat, she was also a writer, and she and the other main actress constructed the scenes very meticulously to ensure a safe and comfortable space for them during the filming process. So the director, Miguel Arteta, was actually outside while they were filming, and he was watching from a camera, but he wasn't actually in the room so that the women had complete privacy and intimacy. Disobedience, which was directed by Sebastian Lelio, was released in 2018, and on screen it really bases physical touch as the signifier for reciprocated desire. There are lots of lovely long moments in which the two women are touching each other for the first time in a while, and it's really their desire for one another is being represented in their reciprocated touch. And off screen, this continued in that the director storyboarded the intimacy and the sex scenes and then shared that with the women so he could share his vision and then have their input and then have their consent. And once they felt comfortable consenting to that, they transferred that consent into the actual shooting of the scene. And like Duck Butter, the intentionality behind it was very present in that the people in the room were only the people who needed to be there. There wasn't any extra people, so they created a really warm and safe environment. And finally, I focused on Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was recently released in 2019, and I think is a really incredible step for consent in cinema, especially for queer cinema, but for cinema in general. On screen, the sentiment of yearning that the two women have for each other is underpinned by the trust that they build, and these beautiful long lingering shots really allow the tension between them to build up and then ultimately allows them to reciprocate their consent for one another and reciprocate touch and initiate sexual contact. And then off screen, the director was very focused on being intentional in filming the scenes and also really elongating the eroticism of consent, which was something for me that was very interesting to see a director actually acknowledging consent and the politics of including consent in shooting a sex scene. To conclude, I want to emphasize that we really need more representations of consent and more scholarship in the area of consent in queer films. By having more consent in media, we're going to be equipping young watchers and watchers of all ages with the rhetoric to understand and really utilize consent. So the questions I'm left with now are, how can we expand the scope to be more inclusive? The films I did discuss were predominantly featuring white women, and I think that in order to truly understand the implications of consent representations in media, we need to be more inclusive and focus on folks with more diverse backgrounds. Finally, I just want to say thank you so much to Professor M and to the entire MAC department and my MAC critical media colleagues or classmates and production as well. Thank you so much.
During the summer of 2019, I finally had a chance to visit the Forbidden City Palace Museum in Beijing. Actually, this was my second time visiting. During my first visit, I was too young to make sense of anything. Beijing was already extremely hot in May, but my curiosity pushed me to get up early in the morning. But I knew when the sun shined most brightly, I surrendered and walked into the Palace Museum gift shop. I am quite familiar with the shop because I'm a huge fan of its online shop on Taobao, a major Chinese online shopping application. When I was looking around, a salesperson walked towards me and started introducing himself. I felt the need to reply to him, which made me uncomfortable because this forced interaction was not part of my online shopping experience. For me, the online shopping was much more pleasant because I can stare at the images of the products as long as I want without anyone physically observing me. There is a certain kind of power lying in the action of looking. In the exhibitionary complex, Tony Bennett suggests that the museums are institutions where the public goes to see exhibitions. Yet at the same time, the public is also on display from self-surveillance and the surveillance of others. In modern circumstances, museum shops are also places where the public is both observing and being observed. However, online shopping breaks this exhibitionary complex model because when one is window shopping online, the experience is usually solitary and free from others' physical gaze. This project argues that online museum stores break the balance of the exhibitionary complex and thus encourages gazing indulgence in virtual space. I define gazing indulgence as the permissiveness for people to stare at certain things for a long time. It is a result of online visual exposure. While the gazing indulgence attracts the consumers to browse more and buy more products, it also brings them the illusion that they have more visual information compared to the vendors. This essay uses the Palace Museum and Gugong Taobao as a case study, analyzing the relationship between historical museums and their gift shops, and presenting how gazing indulgence can lead to chain effects on consumers' impressions. Now I want to give you a brief background of the Forbidden City and the Palace Museum. The history of the Forbidden City traces back to the Ming Dynasty. In 1406, Ming Emperor Zhu announced that he was going to move the capital from Nanjing to Beijing, and thus new royal palaces are needed in the new capital. In 1420, Zijincheng was finally completed. Since the completion of the Forbidden City, every emperor has lived in the Forbidden City until 1924, when the last emperor Puyi was expelled. Then in 1925, the Palace Museum was established, which at the time was mainly used for storing royal properties that were left behind. The transition from the Forbidden City to the Palace Museum consolidated the ending of Chinese feudal society, but more importantly, the relics opened up another window to tell stories such as what people have done to protect the Palace Museum, educating generations of people. Nowadays, the Palace Museum is under more attentive conservation. During the 6th curator Shan Jixiang's terms of service, the cultural relics exhibition area increased from 30% to 80%. Now let's talk about Gugong Taobao. Gugong Taobao is the only online store of the Palace Museum on Taobao. It started business in 2009, and until January 2020, 6 million people followed the store account on Taobao. Here, I want to mention the significance of the museum shops in relation to the sustainability of museums. Most museum gift shops, as we have seen, have a set of standardized products, which are used for stimulating quote-unquote the curiosity of visitors, inform, educate, and provide memories of your experience at the museum. However, Gugong Taobao does not sell reproductions of the actual objects in the Palace Museum, and thus avoiding the issue of the commercialization of cultural relics. You will see more detailed examples in my analysis in later sections. The thing to remember about Gugong Taobao is that people get acquainted with the Palace Museum simply by purchasing products from Gugong Taobao. The innovative products design also brings younger audience into the conversation. I believe that most of my audience are pretty familiar with the exhibitionary complex, since it is a theory that we have all learned during the previous years. So the exhibitionary complex is an idea theorized by Tony Bennett. Bennett takes Michel Foucault's theory of the exhibition complex on the asylum, the clinic, and the prison, and applies the theory to museums. Here on the screen is an important quote from the exhibitionary complex. So here there are 3 major takeaways from this paragraph. First, the exhibitionary complex is developed in the public space. Second, the exhibited items are endowed with a representation. Third, the objects convey certain information to the society. Since the museums and the physical museum stores both fit into the model of the exhibitionary complex pattern, I want to argue that online museum stores completely alter the balance of the exhibitionary complex. First of all, it does not fulfill the first picture, which is a public space. Although there is data tracking and digital surveillance, studies have shown that physical gazes have more influences over virtual gazes, for example, the data collecting and digital surveillance, when it comes to the purchasing decisions. In the case of online shopping, since they are free to browse through whatever they want, there is an illusion that there is this maximization of consumers' gaze, which lead them to think that they are on the side of the power. This illusion might lead them to overlook on possibly obscure messages, which will lead to stereotypical impressions and cause serious consequences which might trigger dissatisfaction among the public. Here on the right is a pocket watch designed by Gugong Taobao. And on the left side is its original reference. The well-designed products, delicate packaging, and the increase of publicity on social media all leads to one result, which is to maintain the cohesive collective perception the public have of the Palace Museum. By constructing the products similar to a piece of expensive jewel, Gugong Taobao alters the public's memory about the original cultural relic. I'm not necessarily suggesting that Gugong Taobao should be criticized for doing that. As an online store of a National Historical Museum, Gugong Taobao has the responsibility of keeping up a positive image of the Palace Museum. Similarly, museums can also modify one's memory on an object simply by changing the way it is exhibited. Cultural creative products are a great way to diversify one's conception about a museum. However, online shopping vendors like Gugong Taobao also cultivate gazing indulgence among consumers in the measure of enhancing visual cues. This is an issue for all the museum and museum shops because only advertising beneficial aspects of a museum is another way of creating a fixed image of a museum. The public, spoiled by the gazing indulgence, is obsessed with the overly perfect image of the museum. Thus, the upsetting news damages the glory of the Palace Museum. And, of course, it is difficult for them to accept. Considering the age we're currently living in, I think there is no way to avoid the gazing indulgence. Considering the age we're currently living in, I think there is no way to avoid the gazing indulgence. However, there should be effective measures for the public to be more aware of the influences of it. And those who play the social role of information publishers online, like Taobao vendors, have the responsibility to acknowledge the fact that there are messages behind the surface. Online shopping approaches develop more gazing indulgence, which museums could actually appropriate to inform the audience about history more entirely. Through the objects that people can actually use, museum online stores may shed light on the reduction of stereotypical impressions of historical museums.